Anyway, welcome back to Business 3210. We're going to talk about power tonight. I had given back your papers this past week. Forgive me, but I gave them back like one at a time as I graded them, partially so I wouldn't get mixed up because I'm in a couple of places at once. So you should have all gotten back your papers at this point, except for the people who either didn't hand it in or somebody gave me a PDF that has to be resubmitted as a Word file. There was a plagiarism issue, and there was something else. Somebody, I think, wrote about the wrong movie or something. So other than those people, so that's about 6 or so students, I should have, everyone else should have gotten back the term paper. So I didn't compute the grade range because I had trouble with this little laptop I have didn't facilitate the use of Excel. So I spent a little time figuring it out, but I figured I'd just get it back to you on Tuesday when I get back home. So, but basically, the range of the grades was from D to A plus. There were about 6 A's and a bunch of B's and a bunch of C's and some D's. So you should all be working on resubmitting the paper. I put up the new Dropbox in the same place, so somebody actually already resubmitted it. So you should be working on it. Everyone can get an A if you apply yourself and go through the corrections I made. So are there any questions at this point about it?
No, thank you, Professor.
Okay, you're welcome. Nobody? Okay, well, if you think of anything, talk to me later. All right, people are still trickling in. 2 more. Yeah, something weird happened with the Zoom thing. Sometimes these computer programs don't talk to each other. So anyway, today was daylight savings time ending. I wonder if some people got confused about that, but that's kind of late in the day, so it's unlikely. But in any case, tonight we're going to talk about the important issue of power. Power in politics. I also discussed this in my 3200 class. It's an incredibly important subject. Your book mentions, I found it intriguing. Your book mentions that
honestly, I feel like we just get like that when we don't like somebody, because when you like somebody, you can do anything, like, because you just feel like comfortable with them. When you don't like somebody, it's like everything they want to do, like sexually, is just like off-putting. It's just like, get the fuck off of me, like.
All right, I think she's talking to someone else.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Louise.
First, good afternoon. I hope you're doing good. Second question I have: when is the next submission for the paper?
When is the next due date?
Yes.
What date I said? I have to look at this. Was it
You said the 20th, but you
The
said
20th.
it could possibly be the 23rd in your announcement. I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, so I'll make it the 23rd. That's right, I did say that. So I
right.
could do a few extra days. I was afraid I wouldn't finish it. I really put in a lot of time to get it done on actually, I didn't finish till today. But I think I got everyone now, except for somebody who handed it in yesterday. I think it was the day before yesterday. So I can make it the 23rd. That's fine, rather than the 20th. I assume that's okay with everybody, so we'll go with that. So we'll make it the 23rd, okay?
All right, the 23rd sounds good. Thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome. Anyone else question about it? More people are entering. Okay. All right, so we're back to our normal, approximately our normal attendance rate, maybe a little below, right? So politics, very important subject. Basically, your book had an interesting point that different people have different attitudes towards office politics. Some people see it as morally wrong. Some people see it as a necessary evil. Some people see it as, you know, something they like to do. And some people see it as a balance, you know, that you've got to do it to succeed, but you know, it's not something they relish necessarily. I would say, regardless of your attitude toward it, the simple issue is, if you want to move up in a large corporation, you need to play office politics. And the people who do move up are people who are conscious of it. You have to do it the right way, though. If you're too obvious about it, you wreck your profile, you wreck your reputation. So you have to play it, but not be obvious about it, and you have to do it in a way that helps you win. You don't want to be vicious. You don't want to develop a reputation for being an opportunist or being overly aggressive. That sort of thing does not help. But somebody who knows when to compliment people, who knows how to win people over, is going to be much more successful than somebody who just is, relying on their hard work and effort. I may have mentioned this, but I once had two students. Both were MBA students at NYU, and both worked for IBM. And one told me she had invented software that was, you know, patented. She had won like 5 patents, and she was this great engineer. But she said to me she had never gotten a promotion in 13 years. The other one told me that she had come up with this idea for a charity that interested one of the executives at IBM, and they were flying around the country together, marketing this charity to all the IBM people. So the question is, who's going to move up sooner? When I spoke to the lady who had all the patents, she said she had never had lunch with her boss in 13 years. And, you know, I asked her that, and I said to her, you really, you know, being really talented is not enough. It's enough to keep your job for sure. And it's enough to get good raises, but depending on the boss, but it's not enough to really succeed in the corporate world. If you want to move up to CEO or something, you've got to be somewhat political. On the other hand, I think people who play excessive politics start to develop a reputation, and they can actually shoot themselves in the foot. So it's got to be done in a way that makes other people like you. But that's exactly what politics is. If you're good at making people like you and trust you, then you're good at politics. So anyway, how do you win people over politically? There's a great book that was written about 30 years ago by a guy named Dubrin, who also wrote organizational behavior textbooks. And the title is Winning Office Politics, A Guide for the 90s. I think he thought he would revise it, but I don't think he ever did. And it's got some really great points in it. Some of them are in your textbook, some aren't. But the basic idea of being good at politics is mirroring, that you should mirror the people you are working for and make them feel as though you're just like them. People are highly biased towards people who are like themselves. So if you can make them think you're like them, then you can win them over. And that means there a lot of attention to detail. It's much more important to be conscious of the preferences of the hierarchy, and especially your immediate boss, who's always the most important one. When I was younger, I often resented my boss. I was anti-authoritarian, and I often didn't like my boss, and I would inevitably leave the company as a result. You want to, if you want to succeed in a company, you really need to have a very good relationship with your boss. And so that means not just mirroring them, but trying to win them over, in a friend, as a friendly relationship. It's also true that you can play games if you do it very subtly to make people think that you like them a lot and that you really respect them. I had a friend who was a labor negotiator, and he used to, like, the people, his counterparts in the unions used to, he would visit the union and they wouldn't be there, and he'd tell someone else, oh, Alex is a great guy. He's one of the smartest people I ever met. I'm always impressed with him. So he would, like, tell people these little nuggets, and some of them would get back to the guy. And so, it's generally the case that things you say about people get back to them, even if whoever you're talking to is supposed to be confidential. It's usually not. So basically, in that way, he would, like, give these circuitous compliments to people. And when it comes from you directly, people always wonder whether you're, surface acting or, basically, as your book puts it, impression managing. You're managing their impressions of you. But when you say it to someone else and they repeat it, it has a much more powerful effect. There are many, many ways to influence higher ups, and your book talks about a little bit at the end, in the end of the chapter, when they talk about having a power diagram, and where you identify people who might influence your future, and you figure out how you can get at them. And this is the kind of thing that corporate people who become very successful think about. There was an anecdote in David Halberstam's Best and the Brightest, which is a book about the Kennedy administration, and about how this group of great minds that Kennedy had established in his cabinet, professors from Harvard and so on, how they managed to make some of the stupidest decisions in history, and especially the Vietnam War and the Bay of Pigs invasion, too, like almost unbelievably stupid decisions. And two of the chapters, actually, very important player in that. In fact, you're going to see the interview of him, Robert McNamara, who was this defense secretary under Kennedy. I assigned that as a movie for you. So I forgot I had done that. So, but in any case, I think it was chapters 12 and 13 in 12 and 13, or 13 and 14 in The Best and the Brightest. And what the way Halberstam depicts McNamara is that he was really smart, but really stupid at the same time. And he had great quantitative skills and thought relentlessly about power. One of the things he mentions about him is that an aide who was McNamara had been in the Whiz Kids in World War II, which was the group that decided on daylight precision bombing that you saw in the movie. McNamara was part of that group. It was led by a guy named Tex Thornton, I think his name was, or something like that. And I may be getting mixed up. And basically what he did after the war was he created his own Whiz Kids at the Defense Department. And, this was a group of sharp statisticians and stuff who were supposed to be, modeling and solving problems. They created a lot of problems. And one of the stories Halberstam tells is that one of these people came up to him and said he had been asked to become the White House press secretary, and should he do it? And the story was that McNamara told him not to do it, and he then proceeded to list every job in the White House and rank them according to how much power they had. So in other words, he had formulated this not only about the Defense Department where he worked, but also about the White House and other branches of government. He made this his business before he even started there. So basically, this kind of thing is how people who are good at gaining power. The other example I use in 3200, and some of the people in the class may have been in that, so I won't spend too much time on it, but a guy named Robert Moses. Does anyone know who Robert Moses was? Feel free to use your speaker if you want to mention it. Does anyone hear of him?
He was a New York City architect. He built like bridges, and
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Christina. So basically, he was this builder who, I won't go through the whole story, but he designed.
Sorry, Professor. Isn't he responsible for the Triborough Bridge or something like that?
Oh yeah, that a lot of things. Yeah, that's one of the big ones. All the beaches on Long Island. So when he took office, he thought of the idea of putting beaches on Long Island that didn't exist yet. And the first one was Jones Beach, of course, which he designed himself personally. And then he built a string of beaches on Long Island and the Bronx, a lot of stuff upstate. And things he didn't do were like modeled after him. So, you go on the Palisades Interstate Parkway. I don't think he actually built that, but it was modeled after his thinking and all kinds of things. So he started with all that. And he built all the highways in New York. So pretty much any highway you go on, he built. So he built, and then he built a lot of the bridges to link the highways to the beaches. And then later, he got the idea to corner all the federal money that was pouring into the states after World War II. And a lot of it was used for public housing. So he controlled all the public housing that was built. A lot of it is quite dismal. So he built almost everything in the city, anything built between 1930 and 1970 or so, he built, and that was almost a lot of it. It was a lot of it. Even stuff that wasn't totally city stuff or state stuff. And it was both state and city. It wasn't just city. And so he built the UN. He built in fact, he basically decided to move the aquarium from Wall Street to Coney Island because he got annoyed with Wall Street, and he punished them by moving the aquarium to South Brooklyn. And there's like millions and millions of these stories. This guy Robert Caro wrote this book, The Power Broker, and there's 1,200 pages. Amazing stories about this guy and how he controlled the state almost totally. The elections meant nothing. And when you're thinking about how he acquired power, it was through a lot of the methods your book talks about: legitimacy, interpersonal connections, and building interpersonal connections. But it was also effort and expertise. Your book talks about expertise power. And that was certainly a big part of it, because he not only designed a lot of these things himself, he designed, if you go to Jones Beach, he designed everything in Jones Beach. So the boardwalk, the bathhouses, the stadiums, everything was his design, the way it's set up. And then he applied the same design across, and then he trained people under him. So if you go upstate to the St. Lawrence Seaway, this was also something he did. He built that, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and the Robert Moses Power Dam in Messina, and on and on. So, he did a lot of stuff in Buffalo too. It wasn't just New York City, and all across the state as well. And like, this was all, the scale of it is hard to get your mind around. So you're talking in today's tens of hundreds, billions in today's dollars. In those days, it was in the single billions. But basically, if you look at the way he got power, it was a lot of the methods that your book talks about. Your book mentions expertise. It also mentions referent power, based on identification with a person who has desirable resources. And he, in part, gained power through a close association with the governor of New York in the 1920s, Al Smith. We don't have time tonight to go into Al Smith, but he was an amazingly influential person who really created a lot of, what people now call progressivism. And it wasn't him, it was like the openness of the Tammany Hall political machine, which was immensely corrupt. But they opened their minds to a lot of the ideas. I don't agree with a lot of it. I'm not a big advocate of progressivism, but basically a lot of these ideas were funneled by Al Smith and his ability to get things done. And it was then taken by Franklin Roosevelt, who was a New Yorker, was the governor after Smith. Smith ran for president in 28 and lost. That's a whole story in itself. I'm not going to go into it. And then in 32, Roosevelt won, who was the governor after Smith. And he took to Washington the stuff that Smith had done in New York. And that then became the New Deal in many ways. So basically referent power, in the sense that Moses identified himself with Al Smith, is often influential. Generally, your book has a sort of a simplistic concept of power. That it talks about the general dependence postulate, that the greater B's dependence is on A, the more power A has over B. And the more you expand your own options, the less power you place in the hands of others. I think that's true. So I think most people, for example, choose to work for a living, and in doing so, they put they put power in the hands of the people they work for. And I think they also put power in the hands of the power structure. I don't think it's that they're dependent on these people. I think that they've been told to be dependent on them and they believe it. So in the end, they don't think in terms of becoming self-reliant, which you do by saving and investing your money, but instead they choose to be dependent. Your book, I think, very interestingly, and I think it's an important point, compares, talks about automatic processing, and it compares it to controlled processing. And basically, automatic processing is where people consume relatively superficially evidence and information that takes little time and effort, and they make use of simplified problem-solving approaches called heuristics. And basically, the opposite is controlled processing, where people apply careful thought. I would say when it comes to their own money, people apply careful thought a lot of the time. When it comes to thinking about politics or believing the claims of advertisers, people are often much less skeptical, and they tend to be accepting of fads and the mass media. And I think a lot of what people base their life decisions on are stuff they're taught in school, and they don't reason their way through it. And instead they accept the idea that they need to be employed and they need to spend all their money, and they shouldn't save their money, and people get rich by accident, and it's luck, or there's some kind of criminality involved. And all of that is nonsense. You get rich through putting your money away and investing it, and everyone can be rich. It's relative to where they are. Everyone can become more rich by pursuing the self-discipline of investment, but very, very few people think about that. And so most people choose a lifestyle where they're working and spending. And the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, I don't know if some of you probably have read it, is basically about what I'm saying. And what Kiyosaka, I think his name is pronounced, that he what he's saying is that you don't have to think that way. You can think for yourself. And basically but that requires thinking outside the box. And it's easier to talk about, but harder to do. It's harder to do because, well, first of all, the way the world is set up, there's a great deal of financial pressure on people who work. If you have your own place, the rents are high, or you have to make mortgage payments. Houses are extremely expensive. Food costs have been exploding, and other I don't have to tell you about the oil and other things. And all of this is due to federal policy. It's not because of Putin. It's not because of any kind of international pressure. This is all federal policy. That all this stuff, rising prices, money is due to money printing, and it's due to expansion of state borrowing, and all of that, is which in turn leads to money printing, and all of that is federal policy. So people are able to keep much less than they are entitled to. People are more productive than they get to keep. Part of that is due to taxes, and part of that is due to inflation, due to direct money printing. So you put it both together, and it's even publicly available that productivity rates have gone up faster than wages. So productivity rates have gone up faster than wages since the 1970s. And so basically people are not earning what they're worth at this point in history. And that's come about by federal policy. Which party? Both parties. I know a lot of people in New York are pro-Democratic Party. To me, it's like saying, "Oh, I like Tweedledum" rather than Tweedledee. They have different orientations, but they both serve different elements of the elite. They're both responsive to the elite. The Democrats are more responsive to public employees. So, people in my union tend to be more Democrat. Oh no, my union is idiots. So they support the Working Families Party, which has no power at all. But most unions favor the Democrats, and so the public employees get a lot more support from the Democrats. The people who are lower wage earners tend to not get as much support from them anymore. So they've gone to the Republicans, and and the urban voters tend to like the Democrats. But the real issue that both parties agree on, and is never discussed in the media, is monetary policy. And both parties agree that it should be controlled by them, and depending on who's in office. And it's managed basically not to support people who work for a living. It's managed to support investors, people with assets, rich people. So what you can do with that, and I would say there's no issue more central to power in our society than money. Control of the money supply pretty much defines everything else, and all the other stuff is noise. The social issues, everything, it's all noise, and it's all created to distract people from that they're being systematically squeezed by the financial system to extract wealth on behalf of the investors. Now, the solution to that I have thought about is that I take my money and I invest it. So basically, the more you invest, the more you benefit from the system. So the way out is to save your money. So those of you who are still living at home, I suggest get a job, live at home, and put your money in investments. Those of you who are past that point, what I suggest is get a second job and invest it. Get a second job and invest the money. Because if you don't have now people who own their own businesses have that duct, that conduit to benefit themselves. In other words, you invest your money in your own business, you make it grow, and so you become wealthy. But of course, the government has a solution for that, and that's called the inheritance tax. So basically, people who build a business that starts to be worth anything that might possibly threaten the big time companies. If they're not smart enough to put their money into family trusts or go offshore with their money, they end up paying most of it to the government when they die, and so their children don't benefit and can't build further on that. So basically, I would say from a personal standpoint, power. First of all, if you're going to be in the corporate world or you're going to be in industry, the key thing in your workplace is to develop office skills, office politics skills. And if in your life, if you want to really be independent, ultimately, it takes a long time. But there are people who unlike me, and I might not be the ideal one. What you can do is you can borrow a sum of money and then invest it, and if it's profitable, you pay back the loan. And but the trouble with that is if you lose, you're screwed. So I don't want to recommend that to anyone, because it's a little bit too aggressive for my personality. But if you look at the great fortunes, they're usually people who have built businesses, some of which involve leverage, some of which is leverage meaning debt. And part of the reason why these dynastically wealthy families have made a great deal of money is that they relied on credit, leveraged their businesses, and then profited by a multiple because their own capital is magnified by the debt. And basically and this is true of Wall Street as well. This is how Wall Street functions. So, one example, and I'll get back to the textbook material, but one example of this, if you read the history of long-term capital management, which was a firm that went bankrupt in the late 1990s, and it was founded by a guy named, what was his name? Went out of my mind just now. I'll think of it in a minute. But it was founded by this guy who used to work for Salomon Brothers. And if you read the book, Merriweather, his name was Merriweather. And if you look at the book Liar's Poker, which is one of the best books about Wall Street ever written, basically, he's the main figure in that book. So in other words, he bankrupted Salomon Brothers, which later was taken over by Fibro and then merged into, I think it was Smith Barney, and then taken over by American Express. And I don't know, I think now Morgan Stanley controls whatever's remains of it, if anything. And but basically it was a major investment bank, and he got into a lot of trouble there and moved on. He founded this firm, Long-Term Capital Management. And basically the idea of the firm, and this gets back to referent power, and it gets back to legitimacy that your book talks about, and which your book talks about. And what he did was he got the idea to hire a long list of famous finance scholars, such as Robert Merton and Myron Scholes, of people who are in the finance textbooks to this day. And they went to work for this firm, and then he went around telling all the bankers that these famous finance scholars were all on the staff of this investment bank, or whatever you want to call it, hedge fund or whatever. And he then, by this means, secured loans from all the major banks. He then got a long list of investors, and with the loans and investors, began using ideas from modern portfolio theory to hedge investments and make money whether the markets went up or down. The great book, I think it's by Roger Lowenstein, about long-term capital management, When Genius Failed. And basically, they were making a lot of money for several years. The returns were like 35%. And then they got the idea to buy out all their investors. So they reduced the actual investment in their firm to $5 billion. They had 95 billion in credit. So there's a firm of like 200 people that had in like the late 90s had like $100 billion in borrowing on a $5 billion base. That alone tells you, any investment is going to be insane at that, but they also had like something like $1 trillion in derivatives. Like, in other words, they were like more in debt than any company in the country, with like, they had a couple of hundred employees in Connecticut, and they had incurred these immense debts purely through the referent power and the returns that he made. Some of it was expertise, of course. Then they had invested in I think it was the Thai baht or the ruble. It was, they made a currency bet, and in that time there was some currency collapses, and those were the ones they invested in. They lost the 5 billion credit. I mean, 5 billion in their base. So the end result was that they went bankrupt. So here's a firm that had borrowed $100 billion from the nation's banks, that had $1 trillion in derivatives debt. And this was 10 years before the 08-09 collapse, which was even bigger, but this was huge. And they threatened to bring down the entire financial system. All right. So in other words, scammers can go very far in this world. And that's an example, and again, it was the referent power, I think, as much as anything else, along with good salesmanship. And they did get good returns. It wasn't that they were stupid. It's just that they were genius, they were smart, they're brilliant, but they just did something incredibly stupid, which was use an equity base of like less than 5% of their total investment. The rest was equity. But I think what that should tell you is that it's not just that they were stupid, but that almost all the dynastically rich families have played those games. So basically, a system that subsidizes debt, everybody starts to play the game. So you borrow to buy your car, you borrow to buy a house, you borrow on your credit card, but what it does to most people is enslave them, because they're buying for consumption. So they then have to pay that debt off out of wages, and it disempowers them completely, and they become dependent on their jobs. Whereas what it does for let's say, what my friend Howard S. Katz called in his book, the paper aristocracy, what it does for the paper aristocracy is it empowers them, because they borrow for investment. And some of them fail, of course, like LTCM. If you read When Genius Failed, it's a fascinating story, but a lot of them don't fail. Solomon failed, but a lot of them don't fail. And when they don't fail, it makes them so extremely wealthy that, the income inequality in our country has been blown out of the water, largely because of this system. Okay, and it's a system backed by both parties. Okay, that basically is not helpful to anybody who's not a financial investor. So the way that you empower yourself is by thinking for yourself and investing your own money in reasonable investments. Now, I'm not telling you to take huge risks or anything. I'm saying invest your money in the financial markets in a reasonable way. We don't have time in the session to talk about that, but I would say there's nothing more important to your own independence in life and to developing a sense of power than being independent of the economy. All right, so basically, getting back to the textbook, your book talks about different sources of power. One of them in an organization, let me change gears a little, I'll talk about going back to the corporate world, is your position in a communication diagram. So if you are the head of a company and everybody reports to you, that's called a wheel. So there's someone at the center and everyone reports to that one person. You're going to have a lot of power because everybody reports to you directly. You know everything. Everyone else goes to you. Likewise, if you're in a chain of command, let's say you're in a mega corporation with a big hierarchy, the person at the top of the chain has the most power. So chains and circles are going to have a lot of power. So you're at the top of the chain and you communicate it down. The other approach is more egalitarian, more equal. And that approach is where everybody in the organization interacts with each other. So that's where, like a company like IDEO, if you look up on YouTube, there's a tape called The Deep Dive, which was a Ted Koppel Nightline broadcast from the 90s. And, you know, a lot of the technology they're talking about is out of date, but IDEO is still going strong with the same people, and they still do the same thing. So, you know, they've been around for many decades. And basically what they do, it's all based on brainstorming. It's all based on sharing ideas and creativity. It's true, the head of it, Dave Kelly, I think his name is, or Tom Kelly, something, it's either Dave or Tom Kelly. They control everything. So if there, you know, there's a time limit, or there's a client who needs something done right away, they'll put a time limit on it. But otherwise, you know, when they interact, it's all equal. And Kelly doesn't pretend to make the final decisions. He leaves it up to the team, and he bases a lot of what he does on what they say. And this is an incredibly creative approach that comes up with a lot more ideas than most companies do. The thing is, most executives are threatened by dispersing power to that degree, by having an all-channel network. A lot of personality traits contribute to power. So basically, extroversion, conscientiousness, being insensitive to other people's influence are all personality traits that contribute to acquiring power. As well, the dark triad traits can contribute to obtaining power. I think I mentioned to you, Babiak and Hare did a study called Snakes and Suits, and they did some research articles. And what they found is that in one of the research articles, that executives are 4 times more likely to have psychopathy, according to their measure, than the average person. So in other words, the average population is 2%, among executives, 8%. Okay, but you know, if you look at how many executives play political games that have some elements of psychopathy, it's much bigger. So basically, the dark triad traits do play a role. Now, years ago, Max Weber, who is the founder of modern sociology, talked about the sources of authority, and he talked about charismatic power. You know, we've already talked about charisma in relation, he was the one who invented the term in relation to leadership, but he saw that as a source of authority. And he also mentioned traditional power. So, you know, like the kings of England, you know, the kings of, you know, whatever, or not just England, any place, or emperors, or, you know, whatever. So the emperor of China, if you will, that this was inherited a traditional source of power until the Chinese revolutions. And as well, you know, if you go to the Middle Ages, they had a lot of traditional power. Most primitive tribes, traditional power. So basically, traditional power. Now you could say, well, we're America, we have democracy, we don't have traditional power. But in reality, if you look at who gets elected, a lot of it is linked to traditional power. Like a lot of the presidents were distant relatives of each other. It's like astonishing. Of course, fifth cousin doesn't mean a lot. You're talking 6 generations back, but it's still fairly surprising that how many of the presidents went to Ivy League schools or similar kinds of schools. How many of the presidents come from certain kinds of backgrounds, and so, you know, the claim that America has democracy and is therefore free of this kind of traditional authority, I think, is wrong. You know, Americans tend to elect people from the same family. You know, they elect Franklin Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt. They're like, what's his name? Not George Bush, the other one, Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush, and then George Bush, the second Bush, you know, and so on. Probably Robert Kennedy would have been elected if he hadn't been assassinated, and so on. So basically, this happens a lot. So we have more traditional power here than people often think. If you look at what your book talks, so, oh yeah, and the final source of power. So when I was talking about Weber, he was talking about traditional, charismatic, and bureaucratic. And bureaucratic was based on the government of Germany, and basically the idea that there's legal authority, that and he created the concept of bureaucracy that, to us is an everyday word, that also, like charisma, came from Weber's analysis of authority. And he basically depicts bureaucracy as a system of assigned positions, reporting relationships based on a chain of command, job descriptions attached to each office, salaries attached to each office, appointment is due to rational selection, and so on. And so basically the elements of bureaucracy are what most people expect today when they see a company or a government office. In fact, it's so widespread that a lot of people, when they see other things, they think they're completely illegitimate. Like, it turns out that a large share of the student bodies of the Ivy League colleges are, inherited, like their families went there, so they get in. And people see this as illegitimate. I mean, it's not very surprising because, traditional authority never really went away. It's like that people are surprised about it, doesn't surprise. What surprises me is that people really care that someone went to an Ivy League college, and that these people who went to these colleges get elected to presidency every year. That there's so many Ivy League graduates in positions of power. That surprises me more than anything. But that they're admitted to these schools based on family, that doesn't surprise me. And so basically your book kind of bases an analysis on that, and they say that influence tactics can be based on legitimacy, which they define as relying on an authority position. That's not how legitimacy is defined everywhere, but that's how they define it. They also define rational persuasion. So reason or rationality is an influence tactic, and you can use it whether you're higher up or lower down. So an employee can use reason with their boss to try to reason with someone. You can also use inspirational appeal or emotional appeal, which we know of from the idea of charisma. Consultation, where you get someone you're trying to influence to give you advice. One of the first papers I published in a B journal, I got in because I asked one of the former editors for advice, and he gave me advice, and then he told me how to get it published, and I did all the things he said, and I got it published. So that sort of thing, that's consultation. That's how you become gain some power in some circumstances. Giving exchange or reciprocity, that you quid pro quo, something given in exchange. If you look at going back to Robert Moses, he wielded huge influence in part because he controlled so much money. When you control that much money, he controlled all the toll bridges. He had built them. He had built all the toll bit. He invented the idea of a toll. Like he was the one that created this in the modern times. So basically, he controlled all this money, and he could use it for public construction. And so he was constantly hiring a lot of the powerful groups in the state, the construction unions, the construction companies, banks, investment, the Wall Street crew, and many others that he helped. And so through all this financial largesse, he accrued tremendous power. If you ever have a chance, there's a great video series. If you don't have time to read The Power Broker, which I highly recommend, there's a great video series by Rick Burns called New York: A Documentary History, and it's a 7-part series. Each episode 2 hours. It's 14 hours of the history of New York, and I think it's in the second or third to last episode. It may be the second to maybe it's the third to last episode. He goes into Robert Moses and in great detail. So it's in 2 separate ones. Part is the rise of Moses, and part is the kind of the second half and fall of Moses. And basically, what he says is that Moses controlled all of the urban renewal money that came to New York in the 1950s. And he basically built the suburbs of New York. That was all done through Moses. And it was also all the public housing. So in New York, a lot of the real estate was transformed into public housing, or else given to wealthy developers to change into office buildings and wealthy apartment buildings. And so through all this money, he developed even bigger influence than ever before in making deals for the financial community, making deals for the banks, and so on and so forth. So this greatly amplified. And this is all exchange or reciprocity power, not to be underrated. Personal appeals, friendship or loyalty is a source of power. Ingratiation, flattering people. I told you about Bob Margandana, who won the union guys over. Pressure or retribution, where you threaten people. Rational persuasion as well. All of these can be sources of power, although some, like the more forcing or aggressive kinds of win-lose thinking, where you force people to do things, that can backfire much more easily than winning them over. Obviously, that's a much preferable mode of power. So the preferred influence tactics that your book talks about for downward rational persuasion, institutional appeals, ingratiation, and legitimacy. So basically, if you're trying to influence people below you, you try to persuade them or give them inspiration. If you're upwardly influencing, then you might want to use more rational approaches. Lateral influence, which has become increasingly important in recent years, any of the methods, I think, is pretty much fair game. Rational consultation, ingratiation, legitimacy, and coalitions. Extroverts use political skills more than introverts. People have different motives to develop their political skills. Some people are Machiavellian. They have a Machiavellian personality and they enjoy manipulation. Other people are highly motivated to move up in the organization, and so they learn political skills, even though it doesn't come naturally to them. Your book pretty much says, it pretty much confirms, there was a famous classical liberal scholar in the 19th century, Lord Acton, who made a famous statement. He said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you read The Power Broker, or you watch the New York video about, the parts about Moses, it was definitely true that as he gained power, he cared less for his overriding vision. He cared less about the parks, less about the beaches, and more about power. And as he gained power, he cared more about power. And Robert Caro, he says that you can track it decade by decade in the career of Robert Moses. And the same is true in many powerful people. They become corrupt as they hold office. Powerful people tend to start to enjoy the power. They start to feel invulnerable, invincible. And this, of course, leads to stupid decisions. People who are high self-monitors, which means that they are sensitive to social cues, and they are social conformists, and they're good at office politics, tend to be more political. People with internal locus of control, meaning that they take responsibility for what happens to them, end up being more political for obvious reasons, because you get things done through politics in a big company. And so if you want to be successful, you have to be political. The more a person expects to increase future returns, and the more they can lose if they're forced out, the more they use politics. And also, the more likely they are to use illegitimate means, which to me does not mean politics is part of public life and organizational life. If organizations are declining in resources, then politics becomes more important. People in a declining organization are going to fight more aggressively. So if there's low trust, if there's role ambiguity, if there's unclear performance evaluation, and I have to add that the great quality expert, W. Edwards Deming, argued that companies should do away with performance appraisal because it motivates political behavior. And basically your textbook agrees with that. Performance evaluation, democratic decision-making. So if everyone's at the same level, there's going to be more politics as people form coalitions. High pressure for performance is going to lead to politics. Managers who are self-serving and self-interested. If the company has a zero-sum psychology, an example is Enron that we saw. I forget if they mentioned in the movie, but one of the things about Enron was that they had the same performance appraisal system as Jack Welch and GE, that they would fire the bottom 10% in the performance appraisal. So that what Deming predicts, and probably did occur at GE, and I'm sure at Enron, was more politics. And so this kind of zero-sum mentality, where you have a forced distribution of performance appraisal ratings, that leads to office politics. There's a very interesting section on Cialdini's 7 principles of influence. He basically talks about why people are likely to acquiesce to political, to give in to political behavior. And basically it has a lot to do with people who desire social proof, who are looking to others. People who like each other tend to agree. People tend to agree with authority figures. If there's scarcity, people are more likely to unite and think in unison. We saw this with the COVID. If anyone who disagreed was attacked. Unity, people are most easily influenced by those who they identify with. Also, consistency with prior commitments, and basically those kinds of principles will lead people to acquiesce to political behavior. So as I said a minute ago, there are different types of attitudes towards politics. Some people view it as destructive and manipulative. Other people view it as necessary but evil, necessary evil. Third category, think of it as a useful strategy and may even like it. And a fourth category think it's just part of organizational life and you've got to use it. I think whether you like it or not, if you don't use it, you can't succeed in corporate America. And of course, you probably won't succeed in government either, both of which often are highly politically influenced. The use of politics at work is associated with negative outcomes such as stress, turnover, decreased morale, and decreased performance. So a highly political atmosphere in a company is not going to be conducive to happy employees. It's not going to be a good motivator. Your book compares voice versus silence. Voice being the discretionary communication of suggestions or opinions. Silence means keeping your mouth shut. Much of the time, as much as I think that voice is a healthy thing, I think, like, my experience is that it's often risky to voice your views in a company. There's a famous story about Mao Zedong, the socialist dictator of mainland China in the he's the one that overthrew the Kuomintang and sent them to Taiwan. and basically Shanghai Shek, and basically took over China from scratch, basically as a Marxist revolutionary. The pain Mao caused was incalculable. He killed anywhere between 20 and 50 million people. It's no one really knows how many, just unknown, but in the tens of millions, no doubt. Huge numbers killed, and many harmed in all kinds of ways. And in the 1950s, he set up a program that he had been a rigid dictator in the 1940s and 50s. And towards the end, he said, "Oh, we're going to have a period of benign openness," and he called it the 100 Flowers movement, because he would let 100 flowers bloom. And so basically he encouraged all the intellectuals to speak their minds and talk about what they thought was wrong with society. And a few trusted him and spoke up. And these were probably among the more loyal people who believed him. And he quickly arrested them and had them executed. So basically, for that reason, I think there's reason in an organization to be extremely cautious about speaking your mind and voicing opinions. The textbooks, are going to give advice like that, but I would say it's probably wise to engage in what they call impression management. This idea comes from a book by Irving Goffman, which was called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. I'll put it on the screen for you. It's one of the most important books on these subjects. And basically, what he said is that says in that book is that we're all play acting, that we go through life play acting in a million different ways, and we say one thing to one. No, let me get this screen share. We say one thing to one party and another thing to another party, and basically we are one way with a corporate when we're at the corporation, and we're another way. Where is this here? We're another way when we are at home with our family, and we say one thing to one person, and we've got all these different roles, and basically we're actually many people. Interestingly, this claim is not unlike what the founder of modern skepticism talks about, David Hume, who wrote in the late 18th century one of the great, brilliant books of all time called A Treatise of Human Nature. And when I first read it in college, I thought he was out of his mind. I mean, I enjoyed his arguments, and I realize now that they're in many ways invincible. A lot of modern philosophy is just an echo of Hume. But one of the chapters in there, I thought it was the craziest thing. He makes the argument that there's no such thing as self, that ourselves are just an illusion. But through the years, what he says in there is, to me, like, because part of it is Irving Goffman, that you change. You're not one person in the course of a single day. You say one thing to one person, another thing to another person, and you're all over the place, changing your moods, changing your opinion. Some people are more consistent than others, but everybody does this to some degree. But it's also that you change so much from year to year and from age to age, and even from one mood to another. At some point you desire one thing, and you think you'll give everything for one thing, and then you change your mind. One day you think something doesn't matter, and the next day it's the most important thing, and so on and so forth. And so, do we really even have an identity? Is there such a thing as selfhood? And I think basically, if you're too inconsistent, I think people will start to be skeptical of your integrity. That's really what integrity means, that you're a whole, that you're a whole person. On the other hand, it's really hard to survive in the world and be completely truthful. Of course, you've probably seen the movie Liar, Liar with Jim Carrey, or at least you've heard of it. And, he's cursed into telling the truth all the time, because if we only have one truth, where it's like a kind of a self-destruction, that we have to say the same thing to everybody all the time. It's like a kind of self-destruction. So our society, I don't want to sound too mystical or like Zen or something, but, our society is basically, a series of illusory interchanges where people adopt these moralities based on posturing that have little to do with what they really think. So like Andrew Cuomo signs a bill against sexual harassment, and then it turns out he's sexually harassing women every day of the week. And that's only one of maybe 10 zillion examples of this kind of thing. It's not just that sort of thing. It's in almost any area. And so basically, and we're all prone to this kind of thing. And so, the idea that someone has integrity, it's always a moderate degree, this gets us to like one of the really great political theorists of the 20th century, Saul Alinsky, who wrote 2 books, Reveille for Radicals and Rules for Radicals. And Alinsky was really keying off Machiavelli. Machiavelli, of course, was the Renaissance political advisor of the Medici, who fell out of favor and was exiled. He had to move a couple of 100 miles away and to central Italy, and basically wrote this incredible book, The Prince, in the 1400s. And a lot of people would say it's the basis, it's like the opening of modern political theory, modern political science, political theory. And basically the reason is that in the classical world, political action was based on morality. The analysis of politics was based on how to become more moral. And the thinking was, if you could become more moral, you would be able to create a more moral society. So in other words, moral leaders create a moral society. And Machiavelli said this is irrelevant, that morality, there's no place for morality in his world. And he basically says the prince has a choice to fear either through love or through fear, to rule either through love or through fear. And basically fear works better because you can lose people's love, but you can never lose their fear. And he basically says that if you lie, it's okay, because basically whatever the prince does to hold on to power is okay. So that's when, this idea that Machiavellianism is playing politics. But Alinsky took this kind of point of view and he turns it on his head. And he says that mass movements can adopt this kind of political energy. That, in other words, you can hold people accountable in power by focusing on their moral breaches. Now, of course, all people have moral breaches. There's nobody who doesn't have moral breaches. So you can pick any system or any person or any political system or any company or any arrangement and find hypocrisy in it, because it's always going to be there. It's impossible for it not to be there, because no principle is perfectly executed. And so if you pick on the violations of these principles that the society or the company or the group holds sacred, you can tear it apart by harping on where it violates its own principles. So he says, hold the enemy up to their own book of rules, but don't be bound by any rules yourself. All right. Now, if you think about it, this is precisely how modern politics is executed. He doesn't just limit it to that. He also, there's many of the ideas of modern politics that have kernels in the Rules for Radicals, in Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. For example, he talks about freezing your opponent and focusing on one enemy and attacking them and turning the fight into a single enemy. Whether this is done by both parties. With the Democrats, it was Trump. With the Republicans, it was Clinton. You can also he also talked a lot about building coalitions. And basically, these principles have been used more by the left than by the right, but they're used by both sides. The right says they hate Alinsky, but they still use his ideas. And basically, this is how modern politics and modern mass movements are fought. Can you do these things inside a company? Probably yes, but it has to be done in a different way, obviously, than it's done politically. So basically, you can turn opponents, you can freeze opponents, and create issues for them, and do things along those lines. I would say, though, that this is a very harsh form of politics, and you only do these things if you really want to destroy someone. And if you do it one time too many, it will backfire. All right, so Alinsky often complained that very few of his followers had the creativity to do it well. And part of it is a neuro-linguistic programming expert once said, a tactic known is a tactic blown. If people understand what you're doing, then it no longer works. And so I think the public is still fairly naive about Alinsky and how it's being used in modern politics. But over time, it'll become more and more passé as it becomes familiar. All right, so basically, one thing you can do to throw people is to create defensiveness. Defensive behaviors are reactive, and you usually don't want people to feel defensive in your interactions with them. But if you want to harm someone, you can create things that cause them to be defensive. A great illustration of that, I'm not assigning it in this class, but I do in some of my other classes, is the film 12 Angry Men with Henry Fonda. And there's a scene in that where one of the people in the jury says, well, the kid said, I'm going to kill you, and he killed him. And Fonda says, oh, that doesn't mean anything. People say that all the time, I'm going to kill you, but it doesn't really mean it. But they don't really mean it. And that's true. I mean, it's a common expression in English. And so, like, later in the story, in the plot, he insults the same guy who then blows up at him and says, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. And he says to him, you didn't really mean you were going to kill me, did you? And that, like, it totally destroys his credibility, because he had just said, he said he was going to kill him, he's going to kill him, and then he used the same expression. So basically, like, this kind of goading, this kind of evoking angry responses is a good way to use Alinsky tactics. So in other words, if you can get someone subtly annoyed, then they express anger, then you use that expression of anger as a tool to make them look bad in front of other people. All right, so this is kind of dirty politics, but it's stuff people do. All right, the opposite of that is where you mirror people and you're in the same meeting, and you actually adopt the same breathing pace and the same posture as the person you're in the meeting with, and you agree with them, and you kind of flow with their flow. And basically then you can then suggest something and they're very in tune with you. This neurolinguistic programming guy said he worked on that technique a lot. And he said that one time he was in an elevator with a stranger, not knowing he had to do it politically or anything, just a stranger. And he did this, he played this game, and he adopted the guy's posture and breathing, and and then he suddenly fell backwards, and he said the guy fell backwards too. It was, and that's like a really interesting thing. And this is related to hypnotism as well. So basically the idea of mirroring, which I mentioned earlier, that it's not just that you mirror them in terms of thoughts, lifestyle, verbiage and stuff like that, preferences, but also like in physical pace and attributes. So anyway, you can identify defensive behaviors from the list in your textbook. And they're often what people do in order to resist taking action when they're afraid to, or they think it's wrong, or avoiding blame. Of course, we saw this in 12 O'Clock High when Savage asked Stovall to delay the promotions. It's quite related, but basically things like conforming to the boss in an overly aggressive way, blaming someone else, playing dumb, pretending they don't know what they're talking about, stretching the amount of time a task takes, stalling. All of these are delay tactics to avoid action and avoid doing something. I once heard someone at Johnson & Johnson say, if you ignore a problem, it'll often go away. That, in other words, someone brings something to you and you don't do anything, they just forget about it, which is sometimes true. Avoiding blame is another defensive tactic. So people cover their CYA, it's called cover your, and bluffing and playing safe, providing explanations where none is needing, blaming others, scapegoating. All these kinds of things are gonna be used by people who are defensive. I mentioned impression management earlier, and a lot of what has to be done in a corporate political situation is impression management. The idea, though, is to keep it modest, keep it authentic. Impression management can lead to better relationships, but if it's recognized, it will lead to reduced performance and negative feelings. So, and again, a tactic known is a tactic blown. Things like conformity, doing favors for people, giving excuses in advance, apologies, self-promotion, flattery. These are all examples of power and influence tactics that, impression management tactics that can be used. So I think this material is a little bit more useful than some of the other chapters, but a lot of it's somewhat theoretical. If you think about it, what can you do to build a power base? I would say there's one big word, and it's in your book. I mean, you know, they say they mentioned a survey that had been done, and they ask people what can get you promoted, and they say hard work is number one, networking is number two. I think that's inaccurate. Just because it's a survey doesn't mean the people answering it know what they're talking about. I would say to be really successful in getting promoted, you have to do a lot of networking, and that's much more important than hard work. Okay, hard work is good if you're happy in your job, or if you want to be a good leader, you want to run the department well, then hard work works well. I had a great manager at International Nickel. He worked really hard, he was creative, he came up with ideas, he cared about his subordinates. That's a highly effective manager, but it is not a highly successful manager. In other words, not that he was unsuccessful, I mean, he was a director in a Fortune corporation, he was, in an affluent job, but he did not get promoted to vice president. Okay, the person who gets promoted to vice president is the one who has strong relationships with the boss. Like Robert Moses used to go to Al Smith's house for dinner a few times a week. So basically they develop friendships, develop long-term relationships with their boss, and basically adopt some of these influence tactics if they need to. Now, if you read Stephen Covey's, which is another book I highly recommend, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. When he talks about communication, he talks not so much about the kind of manipulation I'm talking about tonight, but rather about empathy. And he basically says that you should, the name of the chapter, the name of the skill, if you will, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think I may have mentioned this already. And basically that means look at things, empathize with the other side. And when you see Robert McNamara's interview, he says, is one of the 11 lessons that he talks about, is empathize with the enemy. You know, and he talks about the importance of empathy, and Covey talks about it. I think it's true. If you want to avoid conflict, it's a very, very useful tool. I think we're going to talk about conflict next week. It's an incredibly useful tool to solving conflicts and engaging in good negotiation, is looking at things from the viewpoint of the enemy. And that's all good and well. And it's constructive. But when people like Robert McNamara say they didn't understand the Vietnamese, that we thought of this as the Cold War, they thought of it as a civil war. And, you know, I have to sit back and say, could he have been that stupid? I mean, could he really not have known anything about Vietnamese history? Or could he have chosen to engage in a war in which they plunged in without knowing Vietnamese history? I think the answer is probably no. And I'll just finish this up with a comment that if you believe what the news media tells you, I mean, you're basically, it basically gets back to that idea from the textbook about automatic versus what was the term they use? Controlled processing, automatic versus controlled processing. That basically people will tend to believe the news media, and why that is because their cognitive processes are suspended much of the time. They're not thinking. And so they just accept things that are given to them. If I said to them, "Will you give me $50?" then suddenly their minds will become a little sharper. But if the news media tells them to vote for people who are going to take $5,000 from them or $50,000, they don't think twice about it. They accept it because it's not done directly. And these kind of psychological cues, as we saw with the social media, and your textbook talks about in the chapter in that section, have increasingly influenced people. Not that it didn't exist. This was brought home in the 1930s. I don't know if you ever heard of it. There was a famous radio broadcast called War of the Worlds. And the great genius Orson Welles had a radio show, and he framed the show that the Martians are invading. He actually broadcast it as a news broadcast. And a lot of people actually believed him. There were people who actually believed him. And in fact, the Nazis at that time in Germany used this as an example of why America can't be taken seriously. That, you know, that there were a lot of people who actually believed the silly news, this silly make-believe newscast. But anyway, you could view that as kind of a suggestion of how naive people are about electronic media. But I don't think it's totally electronic media, because it goes way further back than that. If you look, for example, in 1912, a guy named La Follette ran for president. And in one of his campaign speeches, he spoke to an association of magazine publishers, and he told them that they were too beholden to Wall Street. And the next day, the New York Times characterized him as having had a mental breakdown, and they circulated the news that this guy had a nervous breakdown. It's right in the New York Times. You can look it up in their archives in 1912. And basically, what that did is it served to derail his career. So the minute he questioned the media immediately called him mentally ill. But you saw this again when, you know, a psychologist from Yale said that Trump was mentally ill. And basically, you have the same patterns over and over again. You know, I'm not saying it's one side or the other side. I'm trying not to be playing one side. La Follette was a progressive. But basically, anything that's done in the media has to be viewed as being commercial. It's done for commercial reasons, and the commercial reasons are usually not understood by the people consuming the news. That's as true for TV news as it is for social media. You know, if you think that Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox, doesn't have a financial interest in the news that's broadcast, or the same can't be said for Warren Buffett, who owns a big chunk of ABC, or the same can't be said for maybe now it's Disney that owns ABC, but it was for a long time Buffett, or any of the other people that owned the TV stations, Viacom or whatever, Sumner Redstone or whatever it is. You're deluding yourself. In other words, all of these institutions are financially driven, and all of them are tied to the financial system, inextricably, tightly tied to the financial system. And pretty much everything they do has a purpose. You know, if they're advocating one thing and another one is advocating another thing, there's a reason why they're fighting. It has nothing to do with the issues they're talking about. There's another reason, and they don't tell people the reason. You know, it's similar to what I think is has gone on with the war in Ukraine, a great tragedy for many people, needlessly being killed in a region where there's been just centuries of needless killing, going back to, you know, really the late Middle Ages. And basically that, you know, to say that America, I think America is as much to blame as anyone for the entire war, and that's all I have to say about it. But basically, I think the main point I'm trying to make is that anytime you hear anything in the media, you really have to question, why are they saying this? Why do they hate this person? Why do they promote that person? Why does the other one like that person and hate that person? What's in it for them? What's the connection? And I think a lot of it is, you know, very simply put, you could just use a simple word. They're putting people to sleep half the time, that they're getting people mindlessly upset about Kanye West and his antics, and they're not paying attention to that there's 9% inflation and that their wages are going down, and it costs twice as much to buy a bag of fruit now than it did a year ago. And this might be harmful to a lot of people, not to me personally, but to a lot of people who can't afford to pay more and who then have to cut back. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to take attendance and then I'll let you go. It's about 5 minutes. Minhas. Minhas?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Muez.
Professor, I'm here.
Hello, Muez.
Hello.
Dana, sorry, Dana is here.
Hello, Professor, I'm here.
Yes, I know. Karina.
Good night, Professor.
Good night, Karina. Derek,
Hi, Professor.
have a good evening.
You as well.
Xiaolin,
Hi, Professor.
hello. Naisha. Naisha Sherry. Tyler Daly,
I'm here.
hello.
Hello.
Charles DeBrois,
Here.
hello, Charles. Caitlin,
Here.
hello. Reham,
Here.
hello. Fatima,
Here.
hi Fatima. Josanne Frazier,
Here.
hello. Raquel, okay. Gabrielle,
I'm
Gabrielle. Soft day Gabrielle is here. Brian,
Here, Professor. Have a good night.
you too. Maimuna,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Steve,
I'm here. Professor, can I speak to you after you're finished?
of course, yes, just stay online and
Thank you.
You can go if you don't need to talk to me, otherwise stay online. Salma Kahanam. Catherine Kim,
I'm here.
hello.
Hello.
Clinton,
Here.
hello. Ilya Korolev,
I'm here, Professor. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Billy,
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
have a good night. Christina was here a little while ago.
Yes,
Christina,
I'm here.
hello, okay. Shanice. Shanice Lawson,
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
hi. Alex,
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
hi. Have a good night. Ava,
Here.
have a good night. Lisbeth,
Hello, Professor. Have a good night.
you too, Lisbeth. Kevin Matacastro,
Here, Professor.
have a good night. Barbara,
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
how we doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Leonie,
Hi, Professor.
how we doing? Jacqueline,
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
have a good night. Judy,
Hi, I'm here. Judy's here.
hey, how you doing? Jessica Moon,
Hi, I'm here.
good. Have a good night, Jessica. Oriana,
I'm here. Have a good night.
you too. Hamza, Nadeem,
Here.
have a good night. Anthony Nagoyan,
Here.
have a good night. Diana. Diana. Sabita Pecchiari,
I'm here, Professor. Have a good night.
you too. Sapir,
Right here.
have a good night. Shakira,
I'm here, Professor.
have a good night. Eliza,
Here.
very good. Is that it? Oh, no, I was on the other page. Zixuan,
Here.
have a good night. Nahima,
Here, Professor.
very good. Ray Vaughn. Ray Vaughn. Okay, Michael Williams.
I'm here, Professor.
Have a good night, Michael. Ben Wu,
Here.
have a good night.
Have a good night.
Will do. Yang Yue Wu,
I'm here.
and last but not least, Asen.
I'm here.
Have a good night. Okay, now I'm gonna read off the names of the people I marked absent. If you are here, please let me know. Otherwise, you will be marked absent. Naisha Sherry,
I'm here.
okay. Raquel Gray. Selma Kahanam. Diana Owusu. And Rayvon Watson Taylor. Or any of that crew here. Okay, so have a good night. If you need to talk to me, let's talk, and all others have a good week, and I hope you're working on your papers, and I'll talk to you next week.
Professor, I have the question.
Yes,
I have the my paper is the B, and you send back to me, but my blackboard the grade is the C minus. The different grade.
the paper, on the paper, it said C minus.
No, the paper is the B minus, but the blackboard is the C minus.
On the blackboard.
Yes.
Okay, let me correct that. I will correct that. Sorry about that. Let me note that.
Professor, I had the same
Yes.
issue.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You gave me B minus on the paper and a C plus on Blackboard. So I was just a little confused. I wanted to know
Which one is on the paper?
B minus was on the paper and C plus is on Blackboard. So I just wanted to know where
Okay,
I
B
was at.
minus should be right. So,
I think, Professor, we all have the same mistake. I think
Steve,
so.
you had the same thing too?
I think so.
What did you have?
I think C. I mean, I had paper. I think C plus, and I had a minus in the paper.
All right, who else had this problem? Someone else?
I think it's only us.
Okay, the one on the paper is right, the one on Blackboard is wrong, so let me correct those. So the three people who had it was Yang Yue. Yang Yue, what was your grade on the paper?
B minus
Okay, and Steve, you had,
or C minus in the blackboard.
A B minus on the paper, C plus on Blackboard.
okay, and Muaz, what did you have on the paper?
I think she's on the paper. C plus, and I got C minus on the blackboard.
And what was it on Blackboard?
C minus.
Okay, no, okay, so I'll correct those three, I apologize for that.
No, it's fine.
Okay, anyone else?
Professor, I have a question about the paper. Do you want us to be more specific on the paper?
You know, I can't hear you, I can't hear a word you're saying.
1 second.
Yeah, okay, make it a little louder or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you want us on the paper to be more specific in the paper? Because you already comment on it and I got a comment. But do
yeah,
you want us
straight
to
up,
be,
I think a lot of it is to work on the writing corrections. And do what you can with the other things.
then I try to do that because Professor, honestly, guys speaking, past 2 weeks have been overwhelmed because I have another midterm. I'm taking 6 classes this semester. So like I'm pretty sure like I did bad on the paper. Like I wanted to get even more, way higher. But now I'm glad that we have second chance to submit it. So I'm looking forward to do
Good
much.
one.
In the second
Okay, if
semester.
you need help, you can call me or whatever.
All right, Professor. Thank you so much. Enjoy your
You're
night.
welcome. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Go ahead. Other questions?
Yes, Professor. I did rewrite my paper, so I'm wondering, do I need to email that to you to let you to
No, no,
relook at
upload it. There's now another Dropbox up on the site. On Blackboard.
it on Blackboard? That's what you said?
Yeah, upload it to the new place on Blackboard.
Sure, no problem. I'll do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have last question. I'm sorry, I'm asking too much questions. But for the paper, can I email it to you check it out before I submit it? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll let you do that.
All right. Thank you so much. Then I'll do that.
Welcome.
Sweet.
Try to get it to me next week. I have some time.
All right. Then I'm gonna have try to get it for you this week or next week. Definitely for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Have a beautiful night. Second.
Okay. Anyone else?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I was just gonna say have a great night, Professor, and I was gonna say thank you for
too.
helping me out.
You're
All right,
welcome.
have a good.
Take care. Have a good night, Steve.
Professor, do
Bye.
you know any classes you're taking the semester teaching or no?
Say it again. Am I teaching next semester?
Yes. Any classes from? I'm trying to take classes with you. I'm a business administration
I
management and
usually
a business
teach an
marketing.
HR class. I'm not sure what I'm gonna be doing next semester. I know I
20
have 2 sections of this one, but I might have an HR one and 3200 also. So.
If you know what section you're
3200
going to be teaching
3200.
the next semester, and you
What?
can tell the class, if you can know what section you're going to be teaching for next semester, that would be great help for us.
Is it available yet? Did they post it? It might just
I mean,
be
for the
on,
winter, it is available for the winter, but
for the
I have
winter,
no
but
clue
not
about
the
the spring
spring.
semester. So
Yeah, I'll try to get back to you. I'll try to remember to do that. I think I have an email somewhere, but I can't remember.
all right, sounds great. Thanks again, and have a beautiful, lovely night.
You too.
Thanks, bye.
Professor, I did email you and you said, please get back to you on Wednesday. So what you mean is to send that rewrite paper back to you on Wednesday?
No. What did I mean by that? I can't remember. You wanted me to, were you the one that wanted me to set up the new place to upload the paper? There was someone who emailed me about that. Was that you?
Yeah, that's me. I just want,
Yeah, well,
because
it's
I'm
available
not
now.
really
So
happy about the grade that I get, so that's why I rewrite it.
you're not happy with the grade, so you want to improve
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah,
you
I
can
did.
You can improve it
Uh-huh.
by rewriting it, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the idea of the assignment,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
okay? If you need help, let me know, okay?
I do need help, but I already finished that.
Well,
yeah.
if you want to, you can do what he's doing and send it to me and I'll look it over and give you some more comments, okay?
Okay, I will either upload it on Blackboard, either send the paper to you on the email.
Yeah, if you want me to just comment on it, you can send it by email. If you want me to grade it for real, upload it, okay?
But
What?
sorry, does that, so if I do upload it on Blackboard, so that will be my final draft, is that what you mean by that?
Correct.
Oh, okay, I'll send it through email.
Okay, great.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Welcome. Bye. Anyone else? Diana?
Professor? Yes.
Yes.
I'm here. I missed my name.
You mean for attendance?
Yes, for attendance.
Okay, let me check that. On class. Okay, I got you.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Have a great weekend. A
You
great
too.
week. I'm sorry.
Week, right?
Yes,
Week, and now
week.
weekend.
Yeah,
Okay,
mate.
you are. Take
All
care.
right. Good night.
Good night.